Every story you hear about a corrupt, abusive police officer tends to get written off just as one bad apple. But the truth is that we have an epidemic in our law enforcement agencies that few people can comprehend. But a new group called the Plainview Project has started tracking these police officers. And I have Farron Cousins from the Trial Lawyer magazine to talk about that. Farron, you've done plenty of stories on this for the National Trial Lawyers magazine. These stories, we're not seeing as many, we're not hearing about as many as we heard. It was like a rash of these stories that came out where they were more than just social media problems. I mean, people getting killed from police officers that never should have been wearing a uniform. I look at this story and, having been a prosecutor, I can tell you, this is not typical of most police officers. It just isn't. But the numbers seem to point that we got a big problem. Tell me about this Plainview Project and what's happening here.
Well, what the Plainview Project is doing, which I think is great work, is they're going through social media groups, these private message boards that these police officers and other law enforcement officials are using. And what they're finding is that there is a lot more than people should be comfortable with of blatant racism, sexism, Islamophobia, all kinds of things that show that some of these officers involved in this, which right now they have thousands, are clearly biased. They don't like this group of people, they don't like this gender, they don't like this religion. And that obviously is going to present a massive problem for this person whose job it is to go out there and uphold the law.
And do a good job.
Right. And it's nearly impossible. So the Plainview Project came along and was founded to try to keep track of this and to alert these police departments that, hey, you have a lot of people in your department that are making these comments. Here they are. We've printed them out. We've sent them to you. You need to address this and figure out how to make things better. This isn't about shaming the officers or exposing them. This is about trying to get the police departments themselves to work on these people, work with these people, or if necessary, remove these people from the line of duty.
Yeah, I think you have to put it in context. First of all, Lornette Turnbull did this great article. And in this article, it talks about one situation where this is a very typical thing that I'm about to read. There was a meme of a police dog and trying to run after something. And the meme came from a police officer says, "I hope you run. He likes fast food." Now, that's the least offensive of all of these.
Right.
If you see this article, it's just N-word everywhere. It's almost they're equal, whether it's Latino. As I read this, it's almost as if the hatred has turned as much to Latinos as it has African Americans. And we're seeing in Philadelphia 72 officers actually reassigned. Now, that bothers me in and of itself, reassigned. Talk about that a little bit.
Right. Well, we just saw in Philadelphia, which was a result of what the Plainview Project is working on, is they removed 72 officers from the streets. Unfortunately, these 72 officers whose comments that were actually mentioned in a different article, horrendous, they're just on desk duty. So they're still employed, they're still, working in law enforcement, and eventually, yes, they're going to find their way back onto the streets where they're going to be armed with their guns and their tasers and their mace and whatever it is. This is all just a temporary Band-Aid that these police departments typically engage in to say, okay, look, this is a bad person. We're sending them on a paid vacation for a while. We're putting them on desk duty. As soon as the public stops looking, all right, go on, get back in your vehicle, get on the field.
I love this. In St. Louis, there was a prosecutor who said, you know what? She had a list of 22 officers. And she says, in these 22 officers, I'm going to stop bringing charges where that officer makes the case. I'm going to stop allowing warrants to be issued where that officer is involved. I'm going to stop letting that officer testify as a witness because these particular 22 officers have this history of these types of social media memes. Now, you see the problem. The problem is the whole system just crumbles on itself.
Right.
Here you got a prosecutor that says, I'm not going to use these people because I don't believe them, because they're racist, because it doesn't make any difference whether they're Latino, African American, white, whatever it is, these people show really bad history. And so, I saw an article not long ago where they're trying to defend this on a free speech issue. That is a loser. There is no free speech here. This is not a free speech argument. You can't just willy-nilly say what you want to say in a setting like this. The Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services released an audit. It points to over 6,000 cases of elder abuse in skilled nursing facilities that have been unreported and underreported in 2016. This lack of accountability has created staggering costs for Medicare programs, meaning a greater economic burden to taxpayers and healthcare providers. According to the IG's report, as many as 1 in 5 Medicare claims tied to high-risk emergency room visits in 2016 were a direct result of unreported abuse or neglect suffered in nursing home facilities. Joining me to talk about this right now is Lionel from Lionel Media. Lionel, let me ask you, this is a topic people hear bits and pieces about, but they never really figure out who is responsible, first of all, for identifying and documenting abuses that occur in these skilled nursing facilities that go on and on year after year. The numbers continue to climb as baby boomers get older. Who is it?
Emphasis on skilled. What we need to do, Mike, I think is important, is to extend statutorily the definition of caregivers to make individuals who work at these facilities have an affirmative duty, like teachers and caregivers, to identify anything that should reasonably get their attention. And we need to get some type of an extension of the federal misprision laws and make it a crime for you to know that somebody was injured, know that somebody was raped, sometimes murdered by these weird psychological Munchausen's by proxy and other forms of demented behavior, and make them statutorily and criminally liable if they don't turn in their fellow skilled caregivers. It's that simple.
Beyond the obvious spike in emergency room charges that result from these abuses, can prosecutors pursue any criminal charges for the failures to report? As you're pointing out, that's where we have to begin. We have to have legislation that says the failure to report begins in-house. But here's what everybody's missing. Here's what everybody's missing about this. What these facilities do is they pass on all the horrible things they do or fail to do to taxpayers. It's called externalizing costs. In other words, they have a patient that requires emergency care, the end of life kinds of problems that are caused in-house. And the problem is taxpayers pick up a lot of this because they're paying for a lot of these costs. It's not the facility that should be on the hook. It ends up shifting that responsibility over to taxpayers, doesn't it?
It does. And the inherent irony of these citizens, in fact, many of these have already been taxed by virtue of Medicare in the first place and other forms of guaranteed payment. But to think that we have to pick up the tab for greater exacerbated injuries from a skilled caregiver. Not only this, Mike, but throughout, I'm familiar with prosecutors and individuals and trial lawyers who have gone after not only this case, but the avenging angels, the Munchausen's by proxy. This is very quiet. You've got these strange nurses sometimes who want to play God. And then when you warehouse these people and you hire very subpar staff, and let's face it, nobody looks to working sometimes in some of these facilities, which God bless these people, most of them, 90% of them are great. But when you have these folks, these sometimes annoying old people that sometimes have forgotten, and you are in this facility every day, this is bound to happen. Public has to be more aware of this. And by the way, just peruse, go online and look at all of the plaintiffs' lawyers who are handling this particular area. If you don't think this is a burgeoning area of concern, just look at the number of people and the incredible settlements that the plaintiffs' bar, thankfully, has brought to the public attention.
Thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you, sir.